So one thing you hear a lot is, well, patriarchy and gender roles may have worked in the past, hundreds of years ago, right? But a lot's changed. There's been tremendous progress, not just social progress, but economic progress, technological progress. Literally everything has changed. Why would you think the same roles and the same division of labor would still be optimal after everything else has changed? What sense does that make? How backwards can that be? Well, yeah, a lot has changed. But actually, this doesn't harm the case for patriarchy or for gender roles or a sexual division of labor. In fact, it strengthens it. Historically, these roles weren't so distinct as maybe some people think they were. Women did have a lot of participation in the marketplace, did have a lot of, productive economic activity that they were engaged in. 500 years ago in medieval Europe, until they married, they were working as servants, they were working as washerwomen. Even after they married, they would, help their husbands with his trade or minding his shop, or, they would take in job work. They would do spinning and weaving on a contract basis. They would take goods to market, either their husband's goods or, some other goods. And so, they were very much involved in the marketplace, not in the same way that men were, in having a profession or a skill or a trade, or what we might now call a career, but they were participants in the marketplace. Men's roles were somewhat fixed and definite. A tailor had a particular trade, had a particular line of work. A cobbler had a particular trade, a particular line of work. A baker, etc. A very definite set of responsibilities, and kind of everything else devolved upon women. So in that sense, it was the men who had kind of fixed roles, and the women were just kind of filling in the gaps and doing everything else. So, but as these interlocutors point out, a lot has changed. And why does change strengthen the case for gender roles, or for a gendered division of labor? Well, the environment has changed, and that means the difference between the environment that we are adapted to, that we are evolved for, and the environment that we inhabit has changed. So we're inhabiting an environment very different than the one that we're adapted to, because there's always some lag, in adaptation and selection. There's always some lag, and so the environment that we're adapted to is at least, the environment of several generations back, if not more, and not the present environment. So, because that gap is wider, because progress is faster, because things have changed more and changed faster in the last few centuries than they ever have before, because that gap is wider, it follows that the risks are larger. And, the rate of personal failure is higher. And, whenever there's risks and whenever there's failure, that's traditionally something men are responsible for, assuming risk and for failing. And so in a very real sense, if you look at the evolutionary history of humanity, approximately twice as many women succeeded in reproducing as men. So most of the failing and most of the dying and most of the not reproducing that has ever been done in the history of humanity has been done by men, right? And that's what drives evolution: differential survival and reproduction. And the men are the ones who get to do the not surviving and not reproducing whenever there's not surviving and not reproducing to be done. So that's your male privilege. Enjoy it. Lap it up. You are so lucky. But the point is, in a very real sense, men evolve. Men evolve, and women are just kind of along for the ride. And so, if there's any adaptation to be made, if there's any evolving to be done, it makes sense to have that done primarily by men, because that's a risky business. And, as I've pointed out multiple times in the past, there is a sexual division of risk-taking. And, that's a simple consequence of the, the difference in biological cost and investment for reproduction between men and women, which makes women the bottleneck in reproduction, and men, therefore, the ones who are expendable. So that's a sensible division of risk-taking and roles. And anytime there's a risk to be taken, it makes sense for males to fulfill that role. And so, in a rapidly changing environment, in a rapidly progressing situation, it makes sense for the men to be the ones evolving into new roles and fulfilling new responsibilities and taking on new tasks, and to try and keep the feminine roles as fixed and as unchanging as possible, to minimize the risk, to minimize the rate of personal failure. And that's going to be a sensible division of risk-taking and a sensible division of roles and responsibilities. Now, this kind of leads into a point about progress more generally, which is, yes, men are more expendable, but, maybe there's a rate of risk-taking and a rate of failure that's, let's say, counterproductively high. And so that imposes a limit on the utility and beneficence of progress. So, if we're progressing so fast that so many men are failing to adapt to changing roles and changing responsibilities, then, maybe progress isn't such a great idea. And maybe we might want to consider dialing it back somehow. I don't know necessarily how we would, but maybe there might be some way, and maybe we might want to consider it. We might be in kind of a catch-22, though, with regards to progress, because, if you don't progress as fast as other groups, you fall behind and you put yourself at a competitive disadvantage. But, there are costs to progress. There are real costs. The risk and the failure that I just mentioned, those are costs. The other problem is change is not always progress. Change can be error. And if you're making changes slow enough that you can identify and fix errors as they occur, or even, some time after, but at a rate where, they're not stacking up, where you're able to keep pace, where the error correction and detection is able to keep pace with the error creation, then you're fine. But if you exceed that and you're stacking up errors upon errors, the world is not a laboratory. The world is not a double-blind study where you can isolate variables. The more things you fuck up, the harder it is to figure out what, to figure out where, and to figure out how to fix it. And so, even if you fuck up one thing, that may be tremendously difficult to figure out. But if you're stacking up fuck-ups on top of fuck-ups, then just forget about it. The problem becomes impossible, or very, very challenging. There might be some way to approach it. There might be some way to slice it. And, evolutionary processes would probably be your only means of attack there. So, it might be a catch-22. It might be like you don't progress fast enough, you fall behind, you get out-competed by more progressive groups. But if you progress too fast, you stack up errors to critical levels, and you could blow up your whole system. Right? You can fuck up your whole system beyond repair. So, maybe a bit of a catch-22 there, and, maybe that's an explanation for the Fermi paradox. The fact that we haven't seen any technological alien civilizations. We haven't seen any obvious evidence of technological alien civilizations. And to all, to all appearances, we're alone in the universe. Now, maybe we're not. Maybe we're going to discover that. But this is kind of a paradox, and people wonder why this is. And one solution is that there's a great filter, or one answer is that there's a great filter. There's something that prevents life from reaching that stage. And maybe this catch-22 is part of that. I don't know. This is just me thinking out loud. But it's something to think about. And as far as gender roles go, and as far as the division of risk and the division of responsibility, the faster things change and the more things change, the more you probably want to keep feminine roles fixed and unchanging. Right? Because you don't want to expose them to that gap between the environment that we're adapted for and the environment that we actually inhabit. Because that gap means risk. And, there's always a sexual division of risk-taking when it comes to anything that involves risk. And so this is just another aspect of that.